Mr. Shea.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to formally introduce the resolution to support parents, schools, and districts in rejecting harmful, coercive, and burdensome gender identity policies. Thank you to all those who came to testify today and who have submitted written testimony on this issue both for and against. Thank you, Madam President, for your commitment to ensuring that all who desire to speak are heard. And thank you, fellow board members, for your endurance and for your thoughtful consideration of this resolution and of my remarks today. Please note, I've submitted an updated version for board books, which Mr. Goodman has also emailed to all board members. Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 was enacted by Congress with the laudable goal of protecting women and girls from discrimination in schools, athletics, and academia. And throughout its 50-year history, it's made outstanding contributions toward achieving this goal. I'm proud to say that in my own family, my father started one of the first women's collegiate hockey programs in the nation at Brown University, shortly after the passage of Title IX. Thanks to Title IX and to pioneers like my dad, my three sisters enjoyed the opportunity to compete at high levels in a sport that never would have been available to them otherwise. And I'm sure all of you have personal or family stories that have been favorably impacted by Title IX as well. But we have an administration in Washington today that is attempting changes that would literally gut Title IX. The administration knows the changes it seeks wouldn't be approved by the American people and their representatives, and so it is attempting to change the law through regulation rather than legislation, which is why we as a state board need to stand up. A Pew Research poll of 10,000 adults conducted this May found that 60% believe a person's gender is determined at birth and can't be changed. An NPR Ipsos poll from June, we're talking NPR now, not Fox News, showed that 63% of Americans are opposed to allowing transgender women and girls to compete on teams based on gender identity rather than biological sex, while only 24% support the idea. Given these numbers, it's awfully burdensome and heavy-handed for the federal government to force every district and school in the nation to adopt radical gender identity policies to continue receiving federal funds. And for the record, it's the regulations I'm saying are burdensome, not students who trans-identify. Some have called this resolution a form of bullying. On the contrary, this resolution is seeking to stand up to the bullies. Bullies like the Department of Agriculture who say, do what we say, adopt radical gender identity policies and do it now, or we'll take your lunch money. No more free or reduced price meals for you. It's the federal government threatening to do that, not this resolution. Women and girls, like my three daughters, stand to lose an awful lot with these regulations. Gender will become purely a matter of identity rather than objective fact. No longer will we have reliable ways to track how actual girls are faring versus boys and vice versa. Women and girls will lose protections from being with males in bathrooms and other privacy facilities. And to address a repeated claim, it's not students who trans-identify that I'm primarily concerned about. I'm concerned about males having carte blanche access to female bath and locker rooms and all that that entails. Again, that should be common sense. Under these regulations, women and girls will lose competitions and athletic scholarship opportunities, as we've already seen play out on the national and international stage. And they'll lose the dignity of their womanhood being considered anything more than merely superficial, something you can simply put on and take off like a dress or a skirt. A perfect example of this is that one of our speakers today spoke about his biological son showing signs of gender dysphoria from a very young age. The examples given were pure gender stereotypes, things like liking pink and nail polish and unicorns. Is that all it means to be a girl, to like pink and unicorns? I want to stand up for my daughters and for all girls out there and say, you're much more than the color you happen to like, or the clothes you happen to wear, or what toys you happen to play with. You're infinitely more sophisticated and mysterious than that. Of course, men and boys will be adversely impacted by these regulations as well. But given Title IX's original objective of protecting women and girls, these regulations are especially an attack on them. I'm not laying any of this at the feet of young people who trans identify. I have nothing but compassion and empathy for them. I'm laying this at the feet of big people, adults who are imposing these policies and regulations, and yes, contributing to the recruitment and grooming nature of a movement that's sweeping our youth and nation by storm. We heard a few examples of potential unintended consequences today of the proposed regulations. There are others. Consider this scenario. A high school male who identifies as a girl approaches a girl in the hallway and asks her out on a date. The girl politely declines, saying, "No, thank you, I only date women." The boy, identifying as a girl, could file a Title IX complaint under the new definition of sex-based harassment, not for being turned down for the date, but for having his gender identity called into question. So, just as these regulations would sacrifice women and girls on the altar of modern-day transgender theory, so too could those who identify as lesbian or gay eventually be sacrificed at the very same altar. I'd like to address an issue raised today by a medical doctor who suggested the resolution's definition of biological sex is overly simplistic because it doesn't mention chromosomal abnormalities that can exist. If I could have asked, my question to the doctor would have been, how many fingers do humans have? How many toes? The fact that abnormalities exist, whereby some humans are born with more or less fingers or toes, doesn't negate the fact that when we speak about humans, we speak about them as having 10 fingers and 10 toes. Secondly, in the case of Klinefelters, the presence of a Y chromosome still means you have a male. In Turner syndrome, the absence of a Y chromosome means you have a female. It's not very complicated. So nothing at all the doctor raised invalidated the straightforward, common sense, scientifically sound definition this resolution puts forth for male and female. As the resolution states, gender dysphoria is a real thing, but it is not compassionate to affirm children in something that does not comport with reality. We now have numerous examples of children who deeply regret being escorted down the path of transitioning, of those who mourn the irreparable physical, emotional, and psychological damage they've suffered throughout the process, and their number is growing. We also have examples of countries like Great Britain, Sweden, and Finland who have been further down this path and who are starting to recognize some of the bad fruits and to pump the brakes. Our own FDA is even warning that puberty blockers can cause serious problems like brain swelling and vision loss, which the resolution speaks to. One of the biggest harms of these regulations is a flagrant violation of parents' rights. I understand the argument for excluding parents. We heard it many times today. If you share this argument, if you share the information, the child could potentially be at risk of harming him or herself. And I will acknowledge that for some children out there, this could be the case, and it's heartbreaking. But we should have the honesty to acknowledge that there are other children wrestling with this issue who will very likely be harmed precisely because the people who love them the best, their parents, were lied to and excluded as a matter of government policy. I ask you, which would be the greater crime? Both are tragedies, but which would be the greater crime? The child who harmed himself because his parents were informed, or the child who harmed himself all while being systematically deprived by the state of a parent's love in the specific area at the time he needed it most? Both situations are absolutely tragic, but I humbly submit to you that we should always err on the side of the inviolable right of parents to know and to be involved. we are witnessing perhaps the greatest complex mental health challenges many of our youth face today. As this resolution states, we cannot strengthen education while denying that there are things we can know, while denying that there are objective facts and absolute truth still embedded in our current state learning standards for science, by the way. Ultimately, we cannot strengthen education while continuing to perpetuate a lie to our children. One of my favorite authors in school was George Orwell, but I never imagined I'd live in a real-life George Orwell novel. The idea that the speech of staff or students can be compelled, or they could be prosecuted for sex-based harassment. The idea that parents can be systematically lied to and cut out by the state from some of the most important and sensitive questions in their child's life. The idea that males who now identify as females can rob women of athletic victories and opportunities. The idea that chopping off healthy body parts is medicine and should be affirmed and celebrated. The idea that there are more than 100 genders that have no connection whatsoever to biological reality. The idea that men can bear children. The idea that children should be affirmed in delusions about being cats or dogs. The idea that asserting basic facts of biology is synonymous with religious fundamentalism. These things are more Orwellian than even the most Orwellian Orwell novel. And it's my sincere hope that the State Board of Education will pass this resolution to oppose the radical and, I would argue, illegal changes to Title IX, to support our Attorney General's lawsuit, to safeguard the rights of women and girls and the well-being of all, to protect the inviolable rights of parents, to affirm the rights of free speech and, yes, religious liberty, to defend science and the concept of objective facts and absolute truth, and to help keep George Orwell in the realm of fiction rather than reality. Thank you.